Back when the book Shiloh came out, like that kid's book, everybody knew how to pronounce it, but that's since faded.
It's Shiloh.
Yes.
I won't screw it up again, probably. I'm Iggy. We are doing a panel about basically celebrating like stories and stuff in the fandom. And check this here too. We have a bunch of different literary, if you will, and also lovers of literature are going to be sharing a whole bunch of different stories they like, whether they wrote them or just think they're cool. I usually kick it off with something a little more classical. Because we actually have Sreathin that's going to be showing up a few minutes late. We have Pandez that's probably waiting for an elevator. Shiloh here, we're going to have Shiloh here kick it off here in a few minutes. But I talked about the con game. That's kind of why this, all the panels for that are going to be basically like somewhere rooted in masquerade, haunted stuff. Like you go there for the tokens. That's pretty much it. Oh yeah, I need a kidney. I have a bunch of cards for about that. Iggyland.org. That's a whole nother story. We'll about that more, but we need to get this going. So to kick things off, one of the poems I really like, I love Shel Silverstein. I had it, because of timing reasons, we were going to do Mosque of the Red Death. So if you'd like that there. But this one's just Haunted by Shel Silverstein. I dare you all to go into the haunted house on Howlin' Hill, where squiggly things with yellow eyes peek past the wormy windowsill. We'll creep into the moonlit yard where weeds reach out like fingers, and through the rotted old front door a-squeaking on its hinges. Down the dark and whispering hall, past the musty study, up the winding staircase, don't step on the step that's bloody. Through the secret panel to the bedroom where we'll slide in, to the ragged cobweb dusty bed 10 people must have died in. And the bats will scream and the spirits will scream and the thunder will crash like a horrible dream, and we'll sing with the zombies and dance with the dead and howl at the ghost with the axe in his head. And come to think of what do you say, we go get some ice cream instead. So with that, kick us off. What have you brought with us, Shiloh, to share and read a little bit from?
Yeah, so one of the books that I feature a lot to people and recommend a whole lot is The Dry Spell by Ryan Lou Glissant, otherwise known as Slipwolf. If you read a lot of furry anthologies, you'll probably find a lot of his work in there. It's one of my favorite sort of books that I recommend to people as far as like how you can use furries in fiction to kind of just make scenes and time periods more interesting. It's a book that takes place in the Prohibition era, and it's a supernatural story. So it has werewolves, vampires, and love, and like perfectly fit into the theme this year. So I'm gonna read a small part from the beginning, where a speakeasy, which is if you don't know about Prohibition, was a sort of illegal bar, is being raided by the police. And it's shown from two different perspectives in the reading that I'm going to do. There's a third one as well, but that was too long for the panel. So.
Well, if somebody doesn't get here in time.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
You're our backup.
All right, let me see if I can find a spot. All right. So the first point of view is from one of the police officers raiding the speakeasy. And the second one is from a rich rabbit who is standing by watching, who you'll learn more about as we go on. Henderson was on the front line. When the door gave way and they hustled in, the cougar's bugle-horned yowl made Crawford Kane's ears flatten. "This is a raid!" Chaos followed. Drinks shattered, tables overturned. Billy clubs came down on some badger sod who tried to wade through the blue line, and a fox and a doe left the bar, the doe kicking Crawford's lupine partner Charlie in the face, sending the brown wolf's fedora tumbling. Crawford would have gone after the mooks, but his hands were full with a cat who scratched at his eyes and shouted obscenities to shame whatever tobacco-spitting tugboat crew had smuggled her hooch down Lake Erie. Crawford shoved her away, muttering a line about ceasing and desisting that went unheard. He grabbed for a ferret who slipped by, claws snagging the throats of two others at the door. Crawford felt the eyes on his back and knew at least a few beat cops had seen the ferret get past. That was on him. With a snarl, Crawford went after him, leaving the heavy air of the speak behind for the fresh air snap of the night outside. Crawford saw the ferret, tan coat flapping, bound down the street. He wore no hat, and Crawford felt his fedora lift off his head. He'd likely never get that back. "Stop! Bureau of Internal Revenue!" The ferret wasn't stopping. Crawford drew his Colt 1908 from the holster bouncing under his left armpit, regretting it immediately. If the ferret saw the gun, he wouldn't stop for breath till the Indiana state line. The slinky bastard dove left and crossed the empty street, splashing a puddle with one hammering foot. Round a mailbox, Crawford leaned into the wind and followed. He heard a snarl, like the ferret was trying to swear, and hunched as he ran, nearly on all fours like a godless feral. Crawford followed him down a side street, then right again. The metallic taste of the downtown air dissipated. Row houses split to the gapped teeth of hovelled lots. A service station stunk of gas fumes. A closed fruit stand let out the scent of rot. Despite the ferret's now loping gait, Crawford was gaining. Twisted wrought iron demarked the border, resolving into a field of stones. The ferret leapt it, coat tearing. Crawford holstered his gun, grabbed metal and vaulted, crouching low enough upon landing to smell the cemetery's clay. Dates of birth and death were worn low in the shallow moonlight, and the ferret was limping for the taller memorials now. He'd sprained something. Crawford's lupine senses were dialed, and his blood was up. He was done chasing this mook. Bureau of Internal Revenue. He caught his breath as he slowed. "I'm taking you into custody for violation of the 18th Amendment under the Volstead Act. Put your mitts on the nearest tombstone. Don't resist or..." The ferret stood his whole height, or tried to. Something was different about the bum who'd slipped past Crawford minutes ago, blocks back. His frame was stooped, limbs distended, claws cruelly pronounced on gnarled fingertips. The jaws that opened and caught the moonlight bore teeth like kitchen knives. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Crawford breathed, and then the ferret's eyes rolled blankly, divorced of awareness. "Hands on the stone!" Crawford's gun was a reassuring weight. The ferret's teeth locked together around a pink tongue that was starting to bleed. The bastard wasn't drunk, Crawford realized. He was something else entirely. "I mean it! You're under a..." Fangs wide, the ferret lunged. Claws gripped the wolf's coat and jaws found Crawford's warding left arm, held out ahead of the gun arm in defense. Pain lanced his wrist as teeth pierced his knuckle and palm. Crawford fired. 4 deafening shots punched the ferret's chest and neck. The mustelid fell against him, steely fingers clawing rends into his coat, eyes rolling back into his head. Crawford shoved him off. The creature's chest rose and fell 3 times before it settled. Crawford dropped to his knees as silence fell. Backup was blocks away. The nearest telephone was anybody's guess. He settled back against the cold of a tombstone and slid to earth. The semi-automatic came to rest in his lap. He wrenched his necktie loose, wrapping it around his wrist and palm. Blood soaked it quickly. Taking a moment to confirm he was alone with the dead, Crawford reached into his jacket, deep past the holster, and pocketed badge he hadn't even shown. "You were just gonna get a ticket," he snarled pitifully. The flask was in his good hand, and he used his teeth to unscrew it. His gunshot would bring witnesses, so he wouldn't have long to put his nerves back in place. Tipping back, he drew on the whiskey's warmer bite, and his heart stopped hammering. He stared into the black June sky, counting the few stars he could see beyond the pale moon. Truth bit hard. Whatever plagued the weasel, whatever he'd failed to notice back at the speak, Crawford had killed a suspect over a goddamn ticket. Good thing his wife wasn't here to be ashamed of him. She'd had the good sense to stay in Virginia while Crawford went out here to clean himself up. What would he say to his son? A cold well rose up through Crawford's tail against the tombstone. He could have clubbed the ferret, reasoned with him. Possibilities mounted and fled one by one. Crawford's partner Charlie caught up with his scent minutes later, nursing a bump on his jaw. Crawford's worry had surrendered to a numbness, his stowed flask now drained. Good news was, one of the beat cops on the raid found Crawford's hat. Donovan Calvert closed his eyes and slid his fingers around the steel ram's head of his cane. The ebb that came from the earth below the car was curious, fading quickly when first the ferret, then the prohibition agent, hurried past. A disturbance, to be sure, but not the one he was seeking. Neither escapee nor pursuer paid the rabbit any heed. resting as he was in the passenger salon of his Rolls-Royce a few dozen steps from where the speakeasy was being overturned. The liveried possum in the driver's seat turned back, inquisitive under the oily bill of his chauffeur's cap. "Do you want me to go after them?" "No." Donovan folded his white slacked legs, perfectly matched to his ivory-furred feet. His cross-Atlantic Oxford cadence was firm, and his long ears folded back in contemplation. He drew a gray handkerchief from his matched jacket. "What we're looking for is still in there. One at least, maybe more. Keep the engine running in case we need to make chase." Edmund nodded. Flexing spotless gloves around the Rolls-Royce steering wheel, Donovan knew he wanted to get those hands dirty again. Edmund was always anxious to demonstrate his resourcefulness. Two officers stood outside the nondescript, below-grade door as the raid proceeded. At one point, a window broke, but otherwise the drama was confined to snarling and cries from within. When dozens of scofflaws wanted to leave and the American constabulary wanted them to stay, things tended to get messy. Watching the chaos reminded Donovan of schoolrooms he'd sat in as a young rabbit, absorbing maths, learning imperial history, and quietly scoffing at the Church of England's take on the Word of God. There'd been a mutiny on Noah's Ark in the storm between the ages. A lost battle for control of the wooden refuge saw some animals cast out of knowledge to wallow wordlessly in the new world's mud as pharaohs, while the chosen were lifted from the burden of original sin to accept knowledge and language as an earned blessing. Such a metaphorical battle was now waging 20 feet away. Those who sought escape from the confinements of prohibition were being trampled by the forces of godly righteousness. He could imagine the windows in the speak breaking as portholes soaked by endless storm. Who the heroes truly were in the greater story was anybody's guess. Truth was, nobody in that whiskey-bathed basement was fighting the right battle. There were vices beyond vices to terrify them all. Donovan fingered the cane, feeling the ebb, sniffing the essence as his quarry approached. The first patrons were being led outside, most of them sullen. One cat swore up a storm, already cuffed. A police wagon yawned wide. Donovan twisted his hands round the cane, ears up, then down again, with sensations he couldn't describe to a layman, despite a decade of oratory refinement back in Oxford. One escaped. "The ferret, sir." Edmund tensed to go after them. "No, someone else." He sensed his senses expanded as more drunken louses were dragged outside. "However." "Yes?" "Stop the engine and come with me." Edmund disembarked and held the door of the Rolls for his master. They moved quickly. The less ceremony, the better. Downtown Chicago's air was thick with animal sweat and traces of blood tinging the wind. No doubt the carnies, of which the police force was almost exclusively comprised, had their teeth wet. Truncheons had been well used. Police and prohibition agents read charges, wrote up tickets, sent grumbling lawbreakers on their way with muttered curses, their fun over until they found another covered lantern and gleaned another clever password. So it went. In the first weeks of the Volstead Act prohibiting alcohol, the detained would all have gone to jail, but cells had swelled beyond capacity. Only those who resisted were brought in now, and the wagons were filled with the wretched and unlucky. Donovan ignored them. His quarry stood patiently with the smarter crowd who'd surrendered with minimal fuss, intending to take their fines and melt into the night. He approached a brass-buttoned otter brandishing a club. "A word." The otter barked at those lined up to do a straighter, and turned to him. "Certainly, Mr. Calvert." The 20 Edmund had bribed him with was still poking out of the idiot's breast pocket. Donovan didn't trouble himself with it. "That raccoon there is second from the end," the rabbit muttered. "He's known to me. I'll pay for his ticket, but would very much like to spare his family the ignominy of his shame tonight. Have him brought to my car." If the otter smelled anything off in that appeal, he didn't care to know more. "As you'll have it, Mr. Calvert." "Don't let him see me." Donovan had already turned away. "He knows I'll be cross." The otter grinned sharp teeth. "Worried he'll get bit?" The ribbing at Donovan Calvert's vegetarian species was something he'd learned to absorb in circles such as this one. Carnivore nepotism had likely put the man in that uniform. Something like that. Another cop pulled the raccoon out of line. He was confused, large-eyed, small tie poking out of a tweed vest and bulky trousers. Donovan had to admire his comportment as the raccoon traded glances with a mink lass in a flapper who waved goodbye. Clearly, the raccoon's companion had things gone differently. Lucky girl. Donovan returned to his car. Donovan returned to his car and was situated out of sight when the cops brought the raccoon to Edmund, who doffed his cap and beckoned the raccoon to enter. "Who's in there?" The miscreant was surprised, but didn't bolt with Chicago's finest still present. Edmund gave nothing away. "A friend." The raccoon's heightened senses no doubt detected the rabbit, just enough of his smell concealed to keep Donovan's identity tenuous. The black masked muzzle poked in and fixed Donovan with a squint. The cops wandered away. Edmund was ready. The raccoon gasped as the dagger found the small of his back, stabbing upward into the lungs, forcing him into the car and down on the floor. Donovan's cane was at his jugular in a moment, pinning the miscreant down. For any mortal, the dagger would be fatal, even had the weapon been typical. The victimizer turned victim struggled to move as his teeth drew back and the fangs sprang forth. "Drive, Edmund, I have him." The dagger was withdrawn, the raccoon's eyes rolling back in his head from a sear of agony. The blade that Edmund tucked away was bloodless and smoking, as though shoved into a fire. The wound through the fabric cauterized. The car's salon filled with the crisp scent of spent corruption and hide sizzled where the steel cane tip pressed on the raccoon's throat. Donovan smiled thinly as Edmund seated and started the rolls. "When the first truncheons drew blood, you were thirsty, no doubt." The viper's hiss from the raccoon's throat promised death if he rose. Donovan stepped on his head, claws digging at the raccoon's ear. "Your friend was lucky, wasn't she? The mink in the blue flapper. I know you had special plans for her." Under the cane, his quarry's snarl turned to mews of pain. The dark pools of his eyes had become supplicant, begging for pity. Donovan's long ears flushed with anger. He knew the creature could smell it, would be thirsting after the wine pulsing through them now. "I know there are many of you in this city, aimless and hungry. How you came to be this way is of little interest. How you come to be means everything." The dark eyes rolled to search his, confused. Donovan sighed. "A law has been passed by the martyrs of the Black Well, far more consequential than any scribble in Washington. You'll come to know my name as its arbiter in Chicago and beyond." The English rabbit smiled, flat, pitless teeth, and the Rolls Royce took them away. Streetlights flushed and ebbed through the plush cabin. The elevated train beat its steel thunder briefly overhead. The place his quarry would be taken for education was close by. "I've come to save you from yourself and teach you the ultimate truth. As goes the whiskey's still, so the mammal's vein. Make no mistake, my friend, this country is now dry." So, the book is The Dry Spell, again by Ryan Luke Lasant, otherwise known as Slipwolf. And as you can kind of see, it's got this this great atmosphere to it, sort of a dark, sort of haunted, eerie. It's perfectly. The descriptions are so just perfect for a supernatural urban story like this, and the way it kind of mixes in anthropomorphic traits with even with mythology is somehow slipped in there with the story of Noah's Ark applying to their Christianity is just such an interesting, eerie way of adapting the Prohibition era to anthropomorphic lit. So that's one that I thought was perfect for today's reading.
Where can people pick that up? What's the best? They're not in the dealers here, are they?
No, I don't think so today. But you can pick it up at Fur Planet, furplanet.com.
That was really cool. It's like historical fiction kind of mixed with. It's very well thought out. I loved it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's very well researched. It's one of my favorites of 2022, 2023. I can't remember, but it's great.
Let's give a round of applause for Shiloh. Thank you very much. All right, welcome to the panel. Everyone's favorite. It's Sreathin. Everything is shocking me in this hotel. But Sreathin, feel free to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us what you're coming from and all that stuff. You're actually dealing here, right?
Yes, I'm right in front with
Which is why you were slightly late, because getting elevators and getting in and out of the place was a thing.
That is true.
Right.
Plus getting through the crowd. So, yes, I'm Sreathin. I'm a writer in the furry fandom. Been a writer for probably the better part of a decade. I have about 50 books on sale at the dealer's den. And I also run a kind of a webcomic collaborative called ShiftCore. And I'm also a game developer for Talon Tooth and Paw, so very busy. And then I have a quick one, and then if time permits, I also have a first chapter of a longer one. That's the So the first one I actually just wrote yesterday. Well, I was getting an oil change, but it's the start of a book that I was planning on writing. So I had this for a while, but I wanted to get something new, and then I also have something I haven't published yet. But this one's called Cold Blue Moon. Okay, so long ago, the world was full of magic. Packs of werewolves roamed the countryside, vampires lived in opulent mansions and ensnared humanity by the senses. Dragons could sometimes be seen flying through the skies, and if one looked hard enough for it, they may find a fae or two. Even humans could tap into the potential powerful world of mysticism and perform magic unlike anything while others stood in fear and awe of their power. But that was long ago. Though humanity had progressed and made their lives easier, though some would call such a sentiment into question, the other world was left in the dust. When magic was forgotten, so were those that had lived in it. And with humans claiming the top spot in the food chain, it meant that the others had to adapt or die. Some were more resilient to the change. Those were the ones written about in the history books as witches and monsters that were slain in the quest to tame the wild world. And tame it they did, humanity spreading and claiming everything that they could get their hands on. But that didn't mean that those magical creatures went extinct. While no one had seen a dragon in quite some time, there were others able to adapt to life in the modern world. Vampires took night shift jobs and applied liberal amounts of makeup, or just called themselves gamers in order to hide their pale, gaunt complexions. Werewolves remained in human form and often let out their aggression and domination as high-powered business executives or rugby players. The Fae had actually made out the best of them all, becoming social media models and influencers who often used their mesmerizing magics so that they could live life with the adoring fans footing the bill. Even with those that could blend into humanity, there were still growing pains, as huge forests and Gothic manors became towering skyscrapers and paved roads. Though there were some refugees from the encroachment of the mechanized modern-day means of human living, most had attempted to find their place in this new concrete jungle that they had called home. Just like everything else, though, after a while, the new becomes old, and the fantastical becomes commonplace. For new generations of these creatures, most had never known anything else other than city life. Even as a wild creature of magic, these new offspring often felt more comfortable in their urban environment than their predecessors. Tony was one who had fully embraced this lifestyle, walking down the street with laptop bag slung over his shoulder and headphones around his neck. Those who passed by had no idea that the creature who they bumped into wasn't human. That had been the entire point. What he considered to be urban camouflage as he adjusted the glasses on his face. Adapt or die was something that his parents had strongly ingrained into his mind. And just like most humans, Tony went to college, got a degree in computer programming, and had moved to the city from the small town his family lived in to pursue his passion of video game design. This place was a far cry from the hunting and fishing store his parents owned that he grew up in, but he had fallen in love with the city despite his ruse. He wasn't the only one that had been enthralled with such a place either. As he walked up the 4 flights of stairs and into his small loft apartment, Tony opened the door to find all the lights were shut off and the window blinds closed. The only thing that illuminated any light was the computer screen in the corner and the glowing purple eyes that were staring right at him. "Hey, look at that. You're up before 3 p.m., Tony joked, as he set the laptop bag on the counter. "Late night or early morning?" The creature who was at the table gave him a hearty chuckle, and the creature who sat at the table gave him a hearty chuckle while looking at them with those cold, glowing eyes. "Yeah, you know how it is." Oh, cut off again. It's glitching on me, but it was getting close to the end. That is a demon. But yeah, that's the start of that story, which is Cold Blue Moon, which is modern day werewolf vampire slice of life, trying to adapt while also being tempted by the wilder instincts of his bloodline. He's a werewolf also, so.
Is that one you're currently writing, or is that one that people can pick up?
I am currently writing that one. That one I just got started with and started doing my own.
While getting an oil change.
Yeah. While getting an oil change. To come here.
To come here.
And then this other one is one that I'm editing. It's almost ready. It's also not for sale, but get right into this one. So that one did. I don't know why it cut off my browser like that, but. So this is called Enemy of My Enemy. Rain. Some say it can wash away sins, or perhaps just the grime and filth of this city that reveals it in. I have for this one, it's white on black instead of black and white. The other one was. So it's a little harder to read. Rain. Some say it can wash away sins, or perhaps just the grime and filth of this city that revels in it daily. Maybe it's because those who generally slink about the streets are driven inside to avoid getting soaked. Still, as a naked paw splashed into a newly formed puddle, the creature it belonged to would have taken anyone over the shadows and emptiness that had taken its place. The panicked lupine looked around for any sign of life, but with the night had come silence, and the rain had prevented most from their usual nocturnal merriment. It was a rare instance that the city was dead, a rare and ominous scene as the mostly naked creatures sprinted their way down the street and into the hallway. It's not a non-safe word, John Dry's word. The deer knew they... I had to change the species. The deer knew that he wouldn't be alone, though, as he looked over his shoulder. He could feel the presence of his pursuers behind him, even though there was no one there. His breathing came out in ragged gasps as he tried to find someone who wasn't the cloaked figures he had escaped from. And as he ducked out of the alley he had been hiding in, he saw something down the street that caused his heart to skip. A police car sat a few blocks away, and even though the rain was coming down in sheets, the flashing blue and red lights were unmistakable. At this point, the illumination was more akin to the shining golden light of his savior as he decided to make one final run towards the alley to get help. But as he made his way towards it, the deer was suddenly blinded by a different kind of light, gasping and putting up his hands. The twin eyes of the van suddenly came upon him like a hungry animal. The last thing he heard was the sound of screeching brakes before he suddenly found himself knocked off his feet, careening through the air before landing a few feet away and sliding against the wet asphalt for several more before he finally stopped. Eventually the deer found himself on his back, looking up at the cloudy sky painted by the streetlights above them, his breath coming in ragged gasps as his body lay battered down the street. While he found himself unable to get up, it seemed that the damage to his body wasn't life-threatening. Though as a hooded creature suddenly entered his field of vision, his eyes widened and he wished that it had. "Ah, fancy running into you in a place like this," the hooded figure said with a chuckle, as two more suddenly seemed to appear by his side. As the deer tried to talk, he found a pain in his chest preventing him from doing little more than breathing. as the one taunting him looked over at the police car in the distance. I see. Well, we can't have you running to them and spoiling everything. Might as well have been a million miles away, as the two hooded figures picked him up and dragged him toward the open doors of the panel van. His feeble attempts to try and get away were rendered futile as a human that wasn't in disguise helped load him in before the others followed after him. Once everyone was off the street, the doors closed with a final loud slam, and the van's headlights turned on once more before it slowly turned around to go back the way it had come. Soon the only evidence that the event had even happened was a small pool of blood that was quickly being washed away by the rain, and the wary glance of the detective who had just come out from the crime scene they were investigating saw just in time the van disappear into the rain and darkness. The human on the street watched the vehicle leave and narrowed his eyes at it, but when it disappeared, there was nothing he could do about the feeling he had. And instead, he merely took the opportunity to clean off his glasses. He had been in the bodega for nearly 2 hours deposing witnesses for a robbery gone wrong, and it looked like everything was pretty straightforward. The guy came in looking to rob the joint and didn't expect to be on the wrong end of a revolver. He was only there because he needed someone who spoke Spanish, and he happened to be in the area at that time. He didn't mind the overtime, and nothing was waiting for him at home that he had to go to, though being around the other officers was something he wasn't fond of, as he took a few more seconds to catch his breath. "Detective," a voice from behind him said, the man turning around to see a tiger in another officer uniform standing behind him. "I already said you can call me Frank," the detective said as he turned to face him. "I'm not here in that capacity in any case, so there's no need for the honorific." "Sorry, Frank," the feline replied nervously. Frank noticed how much the ropey tail behind the officer flitted about behind him, and wondered just how fresh this man was off the academy. "We got a call from dispatch. They need you to come in and talk to the chief about something." Frank sighed and rubbed his fingers against the brow of his forehead before he looked at his watch. "Must be something important if they're willing to put in the time and a half," Frank said as he shook his head. Did they say why?" "Just that you need to come back as soon as you're finished with witnesses," the officer reported. "You can finish up the processing here Frank, if you want to go back now." "I suppose there's no time like the present," Frank replied as he looked back in the shop, then at the tiger. "You think they might let me take one of those sandwiches off their hands?" The tiger's eyes widened slightly, and seeing the nervous look on his face caused Frank to chuckle before shaking his head. "I'm just kidding. Seeing a man with a hole in his chest like that takes off an appetite anyway. Tell dispatch I'll be there in 15. The tiger nodded and saluted Frank before he walked back into the bodega, which left the human on the sidewalk by himself once more as he put up the collar of his raincoat in preparation. He breathed a sigh of relief as he walked out into the rain. He wasn't a fan of talking to people and usually worked by himself. Doing this favor for the patrols that were out there was usually something that he just did to help the station out. Usually he just worked his cases alone. He didn't see the appeal in having someone to distract him and allowed him to follow his leads unfettered, which was how he managed to close his last case involving a double murder that turned out to be a cheetah below the two bulls that was sick of their hosts stomping around on the hardwood floors all day and night. The fact that he had nothing on this plate was also why he had attempted to get home early for once, though that was quickly evaporating as he got into the car and made the arduous drive back to the station. As Frank walked inside, the station was almost as dead as the streets. With it being the middle of the night, most were already out on patrols, with a few staying inside to do the paperwork and dispatch officers organizing them. It had made it even more of a surprise when the chief called him in, since usually he was back with his family at that time, which is one of the reasons why he hadn't hurried to get back. If the chief had him come in personally, it meant he was in trouble or something significant was happening. Since he couldn't think of anything he had done recently to get up his ire, it had to be the latter. He went to the second floor and pushed open the first door from the stairwell to the office of the police chief. The man on the other side was Chief Brody Hartman, and Frank recognized that bald head and bush-like gray mustache from a crowd of people, as the other man had a file in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other. "Sit down, Frank," Brody said in his usual gruff voice, and even gruffer demeanor, prompting the detective to do so immediately. Listen, we got a big case that just hit my desk, and this one is a head scratcher. And given the urgency of the matter, I brought you in at this late hour so you could get started immediately. Must be if you're willing to risk the wrath of Charlotte, Frank replied, the chief chuckling slightly at the mention of his wife before handing him the file. So what do we have then? Serial killer on the loose? Potentially a political assassination threat? Multiple kidnappings, Brody explained as he put a second glass and poured a drink out for the detective. As Frank watched the golden liquid fill the cup, it caused him to raise an eyebrow in question, but the other man had already continued before he could ask anything. What makes this one so prolific is that we've had 7 confirmed in the last 4 days, and there's no pattern to them. It's a mix of human and anthro from different ages and genders, and when you look at the map, you can see our perpetrator isn't picky when it comes to location either. Frank nodded as he flipped through the papers to see the map that had been provided and saw the areas of abduction did seem to be a bit scattershot. From the looks of it, we're not dealing with a single kidnapper, Frank said as he looked at the adjoining info sheets. 2 of these times are only an hour apart and nearly across town, which even right now with the streets being dead would be a hard time. Plus, if no one's seeing these crimes happening, then it's likely that the targets have been pre-selected and scouted beforehand and are all just being gathered up right now. Hence the urgency, Brody exclaimed. We think that perhaps there might be a paranormal element going on here, something with the occult that is happening on a large scale. If that's the case, we obviously want it stopped as soon as possible. The detective nodded and saw the write-up that gave the same initial assumptions. Though uncommon, the precinct dealt with its fair share of supernatural occurrences, which surprised Frank when he first joined, and as he never really heard about such things before that. Most of the time they kept the news out of the public eye and tried to resolve things so that it turned to superstition and folklore, though the idea of mysticism and the occult was more rooted in the anthro community than it was for humans. Of course, that didn't mean that humans didn't cause problems in this nature, as Frank recalled having to deal with a group of crazed, literal lunatics that worshipped the moon and somehow became beastly versions of themselves that terrorized the city for months. I see that the case is in capable hands, Brody said as he finished off his glass after they talked some more. Frank saw the look of concern in his eyes of his chief when he looked up from the papers, which caused him to frown. Listen, Frank, I know how you like to operate, but if we're dealing with a kidnapping ring, I can't let you go alone. Therefore, effective immediately, I'm assigning you a partner to work this case. I knew it, Frank replied in anger as he got up from his chair, nearly spilling the contents of his glass. You know I don't work with a partner, Chief, especially not an anthro one. You'll have a choice on this, Frank, Brody replied as his face started to turn red, prompting Frank to sit back in his chair. All detectives are supposed to have an anthro partner regardless, and since we got humans and anthros on the list this time, since we have humans and anthros on the list this time, protocol states you need to have someone from that community. You got to be a lone wolf long enough. Now you're getting one to join you, and final's final. Frank sighed, but knew the chief was right. Almost all other detectives in the precinct were assigned to be a human and anthro pairing, so that they could show that both communities were being represented in the department, as well as some humans not trusting anthros and vice versa. For months, he had managed to skirt the mandate by only taking human-based crimes, but became a victim of his success after his closing rate skyrocketed. When he asked the chief when he would be saddled with someone and who it was, Brody just told him that he would be waiting for him the next day when he came in. Frank tried to hide his disdain as he grabbed the file and thanked the chief for the drink he hadn't touched before leaving the office. By the time Frank got home, the rain had lightened enough that it was gently tapping against his apartment window. When he looked at the clock, he saw it was too late to order anything. He searched the fridge for whatever leftovers he could find before going to his coffee table and laying out all the papers. While he tried to concentrate and find any leads for the next day, his thoughts drifted to what awaited him in the station the next day. A partner. It was something he had been dreading ever since he had heard they were assigning them. And while he knew it would happen to him eventually, he kind of hoped it wouldn't. As the hours passed, Frank grew increasingly frustrated for another reason as he rearranged the incident reports for the 4th time. As the chief had said, there's no rhyme or reason for the kidnapping victims. kidnapping victims. There's no connection to any two, and those that did seem to cross paths did so in a way that was innocuous at best. He didn't like going to bed with nothing, but as the clouds passed and the sun threatened to peek up over the city skyline, he knew that if he waited to not snarl at his new partner. Having a partner was bad enough, Frank thought to himself as he stripped down and flopped into his bed, but the last thing he wanted to do was also ask for help from them as he drifted off to sleep. And that's Enemy of My Enemy. That will be on sale fairly soon, probably within March. So if you're interested in supernatural detective stories involving humans and anthros, and buddy cop, and also horrendously not safe for work, so it is boring, but that will be, like I said, that'll be probably the end of March. So it is a great read. I'll make sure all my stuff's not just adult. It also has a good story. So
good stuff.
Ryan, you've been a lone wolf long enough, and now you're gonna work with one. Just killed me.
And we have one more reader for you this morning. Oh my goodness, the con hasn't even officially started yet. Would Lord Pandas make their way to the stage that is
I actually made it.
set up?
Welcome.
Take it away.
Alrighty. Well, the last thing I meant to do before leaving was forget my story at home. And of course, the last thing that I did when I was packing was forget my story. But I've been rehearsing it because Iggy wanted a time on it, and I think I've got it pretty much memorized.
You memorize?
Yeah, well, it took me a week.
Only a week. All right.
I've been working on a novel for roughly 15 years in bits and pieces. It's very slowly coming together. So this is a scene. The basic background you need to know is regular human being wakes up one day and suddenly they are an alien. They have been transformed into a cat-like creature. 5'6" human is now 6'2" cat. They are now going by the name of Johnny Jaguar. They are a black furred cat-like creature. Over the course of the first act of the novel, we figure out what happened and why. This is the beginning of what I would call the second act, where he is trying to reestablish himself as a human, despite the fact he's still a cat. Due to circumstances that happened, just about everyone on the planet knows that he is formerly human and now trapped in this cat body. But they don't know specifically who he is. Only a few people in the government have that specific information. So they're aware of him, but they don't know who he is. And this is him trying to start life again after the big reveal to the world. My humps, my lovely lady lumps. Johnny's arms flailed wildly in the bedding, reaching out, trying to smash the alarm clock. Finally, he got it untangled enough to hit the clock and send it flying onto the floor. Oh, no, it's too early. Johnny raised one eyebrow up and glanced at the blinds across the room. There was a hint of dawn coming through, but not the sunlight he was expecting to see. He glanced over at the clock scattered on the floor. 6:45. It was supposed to be 8:45. Maybe I'll just go back to sleep. Then his bladder alarm clock said, nope, time to get up. Johnny made his way, took care of what he needed to do, and as he was heading back across the apartment, he caught a glimpse of himself in the tall mirror that he had there. Glancing at his form, he's like, I can't believe it's been a year. A whole year I've been like this. This last few weeks has been crazy in itself. He had spent the last month traveling across Europe and Asia, trying to establish relations with all these countries. How the hell did I become the ambassador of an alien species? I'm just supposed to be a regular neighborhood pharmacist. But somehow, that was what he was doing now. But all of that was behind him. He was back at his apartment in New York, and he realized he needed to settle back into life. He realized he needed to see if everybody could accept him for who he is before he could reach out to his family. They still didn't know. They had no idea this was who their former classmate, their former brother, their former son used to be. He went into his closet, picked out a dark suit and a light overcoat, looked in the mirror once again and thought, it's a little David Tennant, but I'll go for it. He took the hallway, walked down the hallway, hearing his steps echo. Of course, everyone in this building hadn't seen a sunset unless they'd stayed up all night to see it. They were all very clearly still asleep. As he made his way out into the lobby, he looked outside. There was already a crowd gathering, people walking on their way to work in the streets of New York. He just slipped right in among them to see what would happen. And pretty much nothing. Everyone was focused on the back of the person in front of them or the buildings, trying to figure out where they were going. Well, so far so good, Johnny thought. He occasionally caught a glimpse of people who actually saw him for who he was, this giant cat creature wearing a suit. And all he saw really was surprise, like, hey, isn't that? Okay, so far so good. He made his way down the block to a little coffee shop. He'd been there before and has the best coffee he's ever had. He got in line behind everyone else, and there was the usual hum of the restaurant. You hear people talking, the click of cutlery on plates as people were having something to eat. And as he slowly moved forward every 30 seconds or so, as the person at the front of the line moved off to get their order, that hum started to diminish. Suddenly, there was absolute silence save for the person taking orders and the sound of coffee being made. People started to look around in line to see if they could figure out what happened. The gentleman in front of Johnny turned around and looked right up into his face. Johnny thought, smile, no teeth. Definitely no teeth. Johnny looked down, gave him a grin. Morning. The guy just looked, blinked owlishly, and turned back around. Oof, okay, he thought. Not the best start to the day, but hopefully it'll pick up from here. As he made his way to the front of the line and got to the cashier looked up and saw this giant cat face staring at her. Is this a robbery? She asked. Johnny took a 20 out of his wallet. Nope, it's breakfast. Large coffee, extra shot, and one of those sugar cookies, please. They are the best. She rang him up. He said keep the change, and he made his way over to a small table in the corner. He dug right into that cookie and started sipping on his coffee. He could hear the hum of the background start to pick up again, but it seemed a little off. He took a quick glance around. The people who'd been at the tables nearest him had gotten up and finished what they were doing, but there was a whole bunch of people milling around at the back of the restaurant. None of them were coming forward to take the seats closest to him. Johnny sighed. The one thing he didn't want to see in the faces of people was fear. But while he wasn't seeing that in their faces, it was clearly present in their actions. They didn't want to come too close to him. Suddenly there was a slight tap on his arm. He looked over, and there was a gruff, middle-aged man there. Having spent several months on a military base prior to recent events, he knew that this man was some form of ex-military. He just had that demeanor about him. You're that Johnny fella, right? Yes, sir. Johnny Jaguar. Everyone pretty much knows who I am. I was watching. I mean, the whole world was when you were
when you were up there on the ship.
It was kind of scary.
You used to be human. That's what they said, right?
Yes, sir.
And when they had you up there, you were basically saying, take me, kill me, in front of the world.
They were threatening the whole earth. They thought I was someone else. They thought I could give them what they needed, and I just couldn't. It was the only thing to do. It was me or the planet, as far as I was concerned.
Back when I was in the service, there was what the higher-ups like to call an incident that I was involved in. I had to get my troop to safety. I acted as a decoy. They got back that day. It took me 3 months to make my way back.
Johnny looked at him. It was both the hardest and the easiest thing you ever had to do, wasn't it?
You know, boy, there are people that I've worked with in the service for years that don't understand that.
The man patted Johnny on the shoulder.
Have a nice day, sir.
Johnny thought, I think finally the day is starting to go that way. That's what I got.
Fantastic.
There are definitely details that I have forgotten, but that is...
A week, huh? I got the sketchy show working on that for months. All right. All right, I'd like to thank Sreathin. Oh,
We have a question?
yeah.
What's the title to that?
The working title is just Johnny Jaguar as of right now. I'm hoping to come up with a better title at some point, but it's a whole story. I've got the details of it all planned out, but actually writing all the scenes and getting them together, I have the end, I have acts 1 and 2. It's trying to tie 2 and 3 together. That's still making me, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that might work, but so it's bits and pieces, but I'm hoping one day it'll actually all come together.
Is there anything else you'd like to give a shout out? So you're in other panels, mine, and you got other stuff going on. Is there anything else you want to give a shout out to?
Shout out to any of his panels that
I'll get to that.
that I am hopefully going to be on. Which
Passwords an hour or so after opening ceremonies. We have improv hour at 2:30 over in the new convention center. If you haven't been there, there's a quick security check. So like, if you need to get over there quickly, give yourself a few more minutes.
So I still need to get my badge, so I better do that right now. Masturbation Saturday night at 8:30. Charity auction Sunday at 10 a.m. Charity Who's Line Sunday at 4 p.m. I think that's the ones I missed yesterday because I got here at 2 o'clock in the morning. Follow me, Pandas at Blue Sky. I don't know what it is. If you look up Pandas on Blue Sky, you can
It'll show up.
If you're interested in hearing more about these great books, I have a furry fiction showcase going on Sunday at 12:30. That's going to be in the same room. So, and there'll be free books. Well, you might win a free book and all that fun stuff. So.
Free books.
Cool, thank you. And Sreathin?
I have Writing 101 tomorrow. Also, Jackbox Party Time, I believe, is tomorrow as well. And then, or no, sorry, got that mixed up. Writing 101 is tomorrow, I think it's at noon or something. And then the Transformation Lovers Anonymous is 6 or 6:30, I think, tomorrow. Then Sunday I have Jackbox Party Time and Dead Dog Karaoke. So
Thanks again, Sreathin. Thanks again to everyone.